Welcome, everybody. This is the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley, and every week we work to bring folks from around the world who have wonderfully cool perspectives on ways to make the world a better place, tell their stories about the kinds of things they've been involved with in making the world better locally, globally, and digitally. Tonight, as it in terms of the time we're recording, tonight we have as our speaker Brad Glosserman, who spent a decade as the executive director of the Pacific Forum. 14 years?
17. 17 at Pacific Forum, 14 as ED.
Brad spent a lot of time as the executive director of the Pacific Forum and a decade as part of the editorial board at the Japan Times.
Yeah.
Ish. And you still write a column for them, right? All right. And he's published books and articles and all sorts of things along those lines. You probably read that bio on your way in, let's hope. And if not, maybe you'll learn a little bit as we go. But I have for us one of the least likely to be boring candidates that we've come across in a while. And not that we've actually ever dipped into that realm anytime lately, but still, I am nothing but confident that Brad is bringing plenty of game to the presentation tonight. Brad, it is a pleasure to have you. Thank you for being part of the Rotary E-Club of Silicon Valley's recording.
Thanks. Thanks for reaching out. It's great to be here. It's 11:06 on Tuesday morning here in Tokyo. So I'm a little more genki, as we say, than you guys. The thing to know about me is I've been in Asia since 1991, pretty much. I spent 17 years in Hawaii at this think tank that Russian mentioned. My specialty is foreign affairs and international politics. I work from a policy perspective. I've written, and I still write a column, and I've written books, but the primary audience is for people that are trying to make foreign policy, to understand Asia, to understand geopolitics. So that's the people that and I give you that as a sense of just how I think about the world, the things I'm trying to address, the frame, the perspective, and the people that I'm working with. And Russian reached out and asked me to talk about the Young Leaders Program, which is a next generation program that we launched at Pacific Forum in about 2004. And it is, as I said, it's the most rewarding and the most frustrating issue and topic and project that I've done since we've launched it. And I'm still trying to be deeply engaged because of all the rewards, because of all the potential payoffs, and because of just how much fun I get out of it, and try to ignore how much irritation and frustration it causes me. And what I wanted to talk about was kind of the genesis of the program, how it works, and some of the lessons that I've learned, or I hope that we've learned and distilled, and maybe then we can talk about it. So the program originated by my boss when we were in Tokyo for a meeting with some folks, and he sat down, as was so often the case if you spend any time in Japan. We were waiting for our meeting with our big muckety muck. And of course, it's a young woman serving us tea, and we started to have a conversation. Ends up that it was a think tank, by the way, affiliated, I think, with the foreign ministry. And the woman who was serving us tea is a PhD from Tufts, brilliant, really, really smart. And we talked and whatever. And then through the course of the meetings, the rest of the time, we realized that we never saw her again. And it reminded us of, particularly when we're engaging in Asia, which has been my specialty. And back in 20 years ago, it's changing a little bit, but it's still a real problem of just how much both younger people, and particularly younger women, don't have the opportunity to engage in these substantive discussions, and the extraordinary loss that I think, the loss of opportunity that these people experience, and significantly how important it is to the conversations that we're having as we're trying to identify issues and come up with solutions to these problems, because the world is changing so much. And so, I would hope that you guys see in your life, in your work, the very different generational perspectives, and just the things that are baked into the way that people like me, and I'm a lot older than I look, people like me see the world and address the problems that we honestly, we have assumptions that just no longer work. And a very simple one is, we talk about Koreas, the two Koreas, and the idea, and the prospect of Korean unification. And it was a given that among all Koreans, until probably 20-something years ago, that everybody in South Korea wanted, and North Korea for that matter, but everybody in South Korea really wanted to reunify their country. They wanted one Korea. And then the experience of Germany kicked in, and a lot of South Koreans, younger ones in particular, who didn't have the ties to their, to families that have been separated by the war, by the division of the peninsula, realize that they perhaps weren't prepared to make the sacrifices that their parents would have made. But we weren't, in the policy world, we weren't catching up with that particular sociological, demographic, and ultimately expressed in a political reality. And the point, I just throw that to you as an example to show you how that there are foundational assumptions that shift from generation to generation that we just don't internalize in our conversations that have a profound impact on the way that we need to think about problems. So anyway, I just offer you that as an example of the need for us to update both our assumptions and the way that we get them. So we set up the Young Leaders Program, which we called it at that time, with essentially 4 goals. Number 1, to educate next generation scholars, professionals, and we opened it up to people that were 22, 23, usually not undergraduates, because they needed a little more honing to get the history and experience, but graduate students, young professionals in their fields, whether it was the government, business less so, some journalists, et cetera, and bring them into our conversation. So to educate them on the substance of the issues that they're talking about, to get beyond just the dry academic recitation. 2, to educate them on process. And one of the things that we do is what's called track 2 dialogues. And track 2, what think tanks do in many cases is they were formed by people that either have been in government, want to be in government, know better than government, that's me, or try to offer suggestions to problems and policy problems. And one of the most difficult issues is that because when governments meet, people are speaking for our governments, right? It's a very sterile conversation. And as you know, those of you working in business, et cetera, that the last thing in any organization, the most important thing you do is make sure you don't embarrass your boss, which means make sure your boss doesn't get embarrassed. So what does that mean? That means that when you go to meetings, when you go to government sessions, when the Secretary of State meets the foreign minister of country X, everything is scripted to the minute. 10:02 steps off plane, 10:03 descends stairs, 10:04 shakes hands, 10:07 exchanges words. It is this tightly scripted conversation that never really offers the opportunity for any genuine exchange of ideas. And when they're talking, it's all about talking points, because you want to get out and get in and get out without any mess and any mistakes. So we started what's called, or what has been started is called track 2 dialogue, where people represent not their governments, but they're people that know about the issues, and sometimes they're government people that show up, but they're attending not as the Assistant Secretary of State, but as Michelle, whatever, who's just coming and speaking in her private capacity. That allows us to explore ideas and not commit our governments, to have an open, candid, and frank exchange. This is a crucial part of what we do, but it's very invisible. So one of the things we want to do is then introduce young people to this, to prepare them for that world. Third thing we want to do is, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, insert their views into these conversations. And then the fourth is to begin the process of networking among them so that they meet their peers. And, in my own personal experience, the people that I first started working with when I took my job 21 years ago, they were low-level, mid-level, good, solid functionaries. Well, they're now all cabinet members or deputy national security advisors. You make those contacts, you establish those networks, and they rise with you if you stay in the business, and you've established, a confidentiality and a comfort level that allows you to explore ideas and to trust each other and to get past a lot of the baked-in issues and the baked-in problems. So that was a lot of it. Within a decade, we probably had over 1,000 alumni from, I think, over 50 countries scattered all over the world. And it was just, an extraordinary process of bringing people together, of getting them to do all the things that we tried to do. The program is ongoing, now almost 20 years old. And interestingly, and it's revealing, when I'm in touch with the people that are running the program, I ask them how many alumni you have, and they tell me, oh, we have 700. And I said, no, you don't, because you had over 1,000 a decade ago. So you've got to have more than that, which speaks to one of the problems I'm going to get to, which is that there's a real tough problem with institutional memory of programs like this that are not the key focal point of many institutions. I'll get back to it. So what are the pitfalls that we encountered? And I'm going to try to do this quick because I've already spoken for longer than I was supposed to. Number one, seniors tend to dominate these discussions. They'll tell you your war stories. They will try to ensure, for example, in the Chinese conversations, when young people speak out against the orthodoxy, they'll say, no, let me tell you why that's not right. They tend to impose their views. They sometimes seek balance between views, like they'll be nudging young people to talk because the guy from that country is speaking too much. So the seniors tend to dominate, and that's difficult. Second, as in all situations, participants sometimes play for their ego, their connections. They're trying to work for their personal good necessarily rather than the larger good, both of the program and the addressing the issues that we talk about. Third, there is there's imbalances when you do international programs, particularly on communication skills. And the fact of the matter is, you got people from Harvard that are coming to this program, and I've got people from the University of Malaysia in Surabaya, and their English skills. Those people are good from Malaysia, but they're having a little more difficulty communicating, and you have to teach them something I'm going to come back to: empathy. And you have to teach the Americans, for example. You have to teach them empathy and communication skills. You got to make up for that balance, and that can be difficult. Fourth, you have to, as I say, encourage creativity, because we've got to be working up novel solutions, but you also don't want to be reinventing the wheel. You don't want to discourage people, but you also don't want them repeating things that we know and we've tested time and time and time again. And that striking that balance is really hard. Finally, and I don't know what you guys do for your living, there is my experience is that there is no system that encourages innovation. Whether you're in education, whether you're in business, essentially everybody is taught to mind their P's and Q's, to stay in line, don't do anything that risks getting out of whack with your seniors, don't take the, as I said earlier, don't do something that could endanger stability or risk embarrassment. And so, if you're in academia, you've got to toe the line. If you're in business, you don't want to get too far out in front of your skis. There's nothing that encourages people to innovate and at the same time, or to take risks. And at the same time, though, you don't want them just necessarily talking out their ass and not about things they know nothing about. So finding the balance between innovation and the proper respect for history is really, really hard. So what are the lessons that I've come up with? And these are going to be real quick because I'm already approaching the end. One, let's start with administrative lessons for someone who's running a program like this. You need a firm hand and direction. This can't be an afterthought. You can't just say, oh, look, we've got all these other programs. We're just going to bring a bunch of young people in and leave it at that. If it's like that, it's going to fail. I mean, and I spent the first 5 years of my life working with my boss who inaugurated the program to get him to understand that, in fact, it's not just inviting 10 more people to a meeting we're already running. If you do this properly, you need to really have a program for them that is in addition to, so you double your workload. Number two, you need to have support from the very top. You can't just create this program and give it to a young administrator and say, get to it. Your commitment as a leader in an organization really helps both inspire the young people, it inspires the administrators of the program, and it helps get support from other seniors that are sending their young people and you're engaging with as well. And you've got to show, you've got to set an example. You need, third, dedicated funding, and doing it right, doing all these programs right is expensive. This is not, like I said, you can't just shovel a couple of more dollars in and shoehorn a few more people into a program. It's the easy way to do it, but it doesn't do it well. Fourth, and this is related to some of that, you need institutional memory. You got a lot of people coming in and out. It's going to be a lot of transitions. It's people from all over. If you don't have the institutional support, you're not going to have the people that are running the program, which are really important because they've got to be creative too, to keep people interested, engaged, et cetera, to find all these young people that are sometimes hidden. You've got to keep them engaged, and you can't do that on a intern salary or whatever you're paying your interns. It's got to be a genuine commitment to see this as a real pillar of the organization. Let's see. Fifth, you've got to give your participations a stake in the program. If you just invite them, what they're going to do is take an airline ticket, a chance to brush shoulders with seniors, and get in and get out and try to get another line on their CV and maybe, brush shoulders to get some attention. That's not what you want. You want the networking too. So you've got to give them, figure out a way to stay engaged and understand it's more than just about what their personal success is. It's more than just a line in their CV. You want to give them chances, participants, chances to bond. So you want to, as much as it's about inserting them into these larger projects, you want to give them the chance to spend time together. And that's creative programming. You got to accept that they're young and they're going to screw up. And that's screw up on all sorts of levels. Everything from drinking too much to perhaps staying, as some kids, one of mine, getting into a temple in Kyoto after they lock the doors. You've got to just accept that young people do young things, and hopefully they don't do something too dumb. And then you've got something else. Last two, teaching empathy. I mean, we're trying to solve problems here. I mean, that's my work. And I would presume in your case, as in much of what you're doing, to solve problems, you have got to put yourself in the seat of the other person you're talking to. If you cannot understand the mentality and the perspective of the person with whom you're negotiating, discussing, whatever, you're never going to come up with a mutually agreed upon solution. So you've got to have empathy. And that's not a skill set that we teach really a whole lot in any line of work. And so I consistently underline that. And it's everything from just culture to communication to patience, you name it. But it's all about being able to put yourself in the shoes of the person that you're not agreeing with. And as my boss used to say, learning how to disagree without being disagreeable. Finally, I think the most interesting and important solution that we came up with, or that I've come up with, is we're dealing with, in my work at least, really intractable problems. It's how do we denuclearize the North Korean peninsula? How do we make China and Japan overcome hundreds of years of animosity? How do we try to create a better cross-strait relationship? I mean, pick it. Those are the big headline stuff, but that's the sort of stuff that at least I'm working with. These are old and intractable problems. Clearly, the status quo has not worked. I mean, kept us from fighting some wars, but the problems persist, which means we need new solutions. And again, if you think about what I said earlier about how none of these systems encourage us to innovate, why should we just keep redoing the same old thing when it's not solving a problem? So how is it that we come up with good solutions? And the problem is, usually most of us just aren't that smart. And even if we are, being smart doesn't mean that we're going to fix these problems. So what I've come up with and suggested is the key is methodology. And to me, the cornerstone of that methodological approach is mixing and matching. And then what we need to do is bring together people from different perspectives, different work, who attack the same problem in different ways. So I would bring together, academics are thinking academically, politicians are bureaucrats, or ministry officials or bureaucrats, as are many think tankers. Media people are looking at through this lens of public opinion, or how to get the most eyeballs. Military people are problem solvers in a very small logistical sense. Business people similarly are seeing it through a different lens. So it occurred to me that what we really need to be doing is putting people together and getting people to see the world, again, because of the sympathy thing, through other angles, and figuring out if there are ways that we can employ somebody else's tools to address our problem and see if that gives us a different solution. And the young people, I think, are the ones that have the energy and the creativity to try to figure that out. So our key is nurture that, go with that, try to use that as the most important takeaway that I had in all of the work that I've done. I've gone over time, but I think it was worth it.
Oh, yeah. Excellent. All right. So I'd like to do some quick introductions so that we can get to some Q&A. Those of you who are in the group, be prepared to leap in with whatever question you may have. When I call your name, please wave at the camera. Rushton, hey, that's me. All right, our Club Paella Master, Shags, all right, in Walnut Creek. We have representing Southern California, Mr. Mark Doan. Good to see you, sir. And representing the great state of Michigan, Melanie Zay. Melanie, good to have you with us as well. So to start off the questions and talking about things like networking and getting people to learn to empathize with folks from other settings, I would guess that the participants who've been in the Young Leaders Forum, the Young Leaders Program, have been working with each other well after the events of bringing them together. So this idea that you're going to have people who are part of different governments have like these channels of communication with each other, and that would be, like a constructive avenue for some pretty creative possibilities. Is that something that you guys have documented along the way, that you've been able to just come out anecdotally? How do you handle it?
Documented, well, it depends on what you mean by documented. So one of the things, the program is evolved, is always evolving. What we wanted to do is make sure that, for example, that people would come into the program, they would prepare. So we had them write 500-word essays, for example, on questions that were related. Then they would polish the essay after the meeting. How does this change? And we thought that was interesting, but it wasn't necessarily encouraging the engagement that we wanted, because it was still everybody doing their own thing. So we started doing group projects. And we say, all right, coming out of this, 3 of you, and this is all pre-Zoom. Remember, this is 15 years ago, before we were all very comfortable in a virtual environment, was, all right, then why don't you do a group project? And we'll divide the 20 of you at this meeting into 5 groups, 4 of each, and you pick a topic, or you international, blah, blah, blah. And we would try to create as much diversity as possible to force them to work together and force them to compromise. And as you can imagine, that's hard. It's hard because A, again, the skill sets are different. B, the technology was less comfortable. So they weren't Zooming. They would typically be chatting on some sort of internet, something. People have different skill sets, different commitments, different levels of work. So invariably you had, well, we did this and so never did anything, right? The usual group project mentality. You don't have to be a young person for that. And so it was a challenge and it always proves to be a challenge in any of this stuff, to attempt to get people to stay engaged in these projects. And again, it's sometimes it was the best of intentions. People come home, they're deeply, deeply interested in what they're doing when they're there. Then they go home, they got another life and another reality. And then what forces them to keep them busy. Some of them were frankly selfish shits, right? And it was about the purpose. The reason you would go to a program was because we would fly you to Beijing. You'd have a chance to go to China. You do this, that, or the other. Pick your topic. One program we did one year, we had a group of people that we actually took around the world in 1 week. We had meetings in Rome, in Geneva, in Tokyo, I think over the course of 1 week. And there was a core group of about 8 or 10 people that we took all the way around the world. And then the rest, at each meeting, we'd have different people join. So there'd be 30 or so people in each meeting. I mean, that's pretty cool, right? 20-something-year-olds. And, they loved it while they were doing it. And they loved being able to talk about it. But getting them to do it once it's over with, keeping engaged, unless you hold some sort of Damoclesian sword over their head, you'll never do it again. We'll send nasty, comments to your advisors or whomever, and we'll blackball you in some way. We don't have that power. It could be difficult for people that were frankly selfish and more concerned about themselves than the program and the project to stay engaged.
So great question came in from Melanie about the people who were selected for the program. She asks, are these folks who had to have a political science background? Or anyone with a different background could join? How did you choose the participants?
Well, it matured over time. Obviously, when it first started, we would go to our friends who were professor of this or the think tank that and here, and it would be they recommended their best student, their best researcher, what have you, their best young person in this project, and they would come. Over time, word of mouth spread, and we got. People would be sending us email. We would, and then over time, again, similarly, we would we learned the particular channels. We have our expanding list of professors and people that we know at think tanks, and once or twice a year, we'd send out a mass blast. We would ask the participants in the program if they would recommend anybody. There was a lot of that going on. So we tried to be, and I would, again, I probably took this more personally than anybody else, including the directors of the program, because they were so damn busy. They were just trying to get the job done. I was the one that had the thinking. And I don't, I've discovered that we all need to have a little bit of time in our life where we put our feet on the table and think about the problems we're supposed to be dealing with and stuff, as opposed to just doing it. And it's hard, man, particularly when a program like this, when we were running 2 conferences a month somewhere around the world, and there was one young leaders program administrator having to do everything from find people, get them tickets, get them in, get them out, edit their work. It's a huge menu of stuff. And, we're paying one young person $40,000, $50,000 a year away, 10, 15 years ago. That's not a bad salary. It's not nearly enough. I needed 3 people to do that job correctly. And then I needed somebody to kind of lighten my load so that I could think about it and do the others, the stuff pertinent to that. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting distracted. But so the idea would be to try to get as much of a mix and to make sure that you didn't end up with just all these Harvard PhDs, because God knows we have enough of those people attending our programs, or the science mafia, which is where I'm from, the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. You end up with one pipeline, and you end up, it just grows and grows and swells like mushrooms in the brain. And so what we'd have to try to do is reach out, get journalists, get media, business people are tough, but try to expand and try to, and again, one of the difficulties here is that the people that we're reaching out to may not have the vocabulary and the ability, nor the bosses that see the value of programs like this that would encourage them to engage.
Fantastic. And another question that comes in off of the bio. You've been working on a book that also covers the relationship between emerging technologies and new national security concerns. I think you put it. Can you talk about some of the technologies that play most prominently in your thinking about how that book is being shaped?
Sure. Well, the book, I mean, it's a different topic, but yeah, and in fact, the manuscript actually was finished last week. My co-author finally had been having some let's say issues. We finally got the stuff done, and that meant I updated the chapter. The argument that we're making is that we live in what I call the new national security economy, in which we're seeing in a new geopolitical competition that is between the West and the rest, and we often mischaracterize it as China versus the West, but it's more than that. And it is primarily being fought over the emerging technologies is one of the key battlegrounds. And the degree to which that economic success is going to be the determinant of who sort of shapes the world order that emerges. And this is very different from the Cold War because the Soviets were a one-dimensional military competitor, and China is much, much more than that. And so, there is an ideological appeal to the Chinese system that says we're solving problems of poverty, we're increasing our wealth, authoritarianism works for us, it's better and more in line with the culture of group orientation. We've got billions, trillions of dollars we're lending in the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative to help development. All of these things the Soviets never did, and they're doing it successfully. And so and we're seeing, quite frankly, for you folks, I don't know if you've been following the news, but Biden's executive order on Friday that had to deal with cutting off some of the technologies and the application of the foreign direct product rule to exports, particularly chips, has been, in one breath, we want to keep these technologies out of the hands of our adversaries, and particularly in China. But more equally important, they're saying what we really want to do is make sure that China does not become an economic competitor, does not really challenge us at this level, does not, create the products, create the standards, develop, set the rules in the international organizations. All of this flows from success and victory in this new economic competition. To the question of technologies, I mean, chips are vital, but I mean, I would think, we're focused a lot on AI, which is what, an advanced general technology, which is going to disseminate. AI itself becomes its applications become what's so important. 3D printing, I don't think we've begun to understand. The real key, I think, over time, most people will tell you, is probably bio and biotech, and that the way that that's going to become so vital. But you look at what the U.S. has identified as emerging and critical technologies in some legislation that was passed in 2018, and the Export Control Reform Act and the Foreign Investment Risk Reduction Modernization Act, FIRMA, which gave specific instructions about identifying sets of technologies that are considered critical. Quantum computing is on that list. All the stuff that I just mentioned to you, some nuclear technologies, batteries, green tech. There's a whole list of anywhere between 10 and 14, depending on who you're using. But those are going to be the vital technologies we're talking about.
All right, we'll do one more question before we wind it down. That'll be from Mark. Mark, why don't you go ahead and unmute and ask the final question?
So, fabulous meeting. This has my mind whirling. There's so much, Brad, that there's so much to this because it's so interrelated, and yet we don't realize it's interrelated. Everybody keeps trying to stay in their own channels, right, which I assume is the biggest problem that you guys have to deal with. Is you pull a whole bunch of people, you talked about Harvard PhDs, and then you meet somebody who's a lifelong bureaucrat, throw in somebody from the military, everybody tends to stay in their own channels. Now, when you're looking for people, the thing that I look at when I find these groups that work is, I've got friends who are military, people who have worked like that. They all have a real sense of curiosity. Right. And I think that's what pulls in with the empathy is they're curious. They want to know. Do you tend to find that you find, or the program tends to attract, or you take in people who just show a higher level of curiosity than the average within the field?
Well, To some degree, that's almost baked in insofar as we're looking for initiative from some of these young people. So that requires them to be curious about the program, to search it out, and to get engaged on their own. So that, yes, it's baked in. The curiosity is important. A readiness to think out, to color outside the lines is really important. And that sort of goes to Melanie's question, that they don't have to have a political science background, because you need this broader perspective. And, you know, we need engineering folks are useful. My wife works on civil society related stuff at NGOs. And again, that's a different problem solving set. And she was, at one point, she was engaged with the program as well. And so you find that having, you know, their problem solvers really becomes, and to be a real problem solver as opposed to a paper pusher, you've got to have that curiosity. You've got to have that that desire to innovate and the desire to push. And there is, along the way, there's a lot of self-selection, but you got to be careful too. I mean, as always, some of the people that are the most engaged and most energized are the ones that are most focused on polishing their CV, polishing the apple, and polishing your ass, right? So.
And on that polishing comment, we will wind things down. First of all of you who have joined us, make sure to let us know you were here in the attendance form that's just slightly down the meeting page. If you are catching us during the week, that this program is the anchor of our meeting. And if you successfully type in your email address correctly, you will get an email that you can pass along to your club secretary to make up a miss if you are focused on such things. A little farther down the page, you'll find our discuss forum, and we hope that you will leave comments about what you've heard in this program, as well as other elements of the meeting as well. You're welcome to respond to what other people have commented. That is one of the ways in an online and asynchronous club we work with each other's ideas, and so we welcome that from you as well. As we always like to do, we hand it back to our speaker for the final word. So Brad, what would you like people to have in their minds as they step away from this recording?
I think, you know, the key here is first of all, to recognize the importance of this mentoring process. And I think, you know, that we find it really, I find it very fulfilling, and nothing more important. And it's, you see the payoff. I mean, I go into ministries, and I've been meeting with the chiefs of staff of the South Korean Army, and a young kid will walk up to the translator and says to me, "Remember me?" I'm like, "No, I'm sorry, I don't." Because I was one of your young leaders. Or I've been in the secretariat of the National Security Council in Japan. And again, young kid, Brad, good to see you again. Ono-san, right? And there is a real reward that comes from that. But it's you know, with anybody with kids, I suppose, and that, without being too, you know, condescending with that particular analogy, you know, the key here is finding that balance of encouraging innovation, figuring out how to get them out of their little narrow lanes, out of these stovepipes, to look at the problems more from, you know, a larger perspective. And at the same time, though, trying not to merely rehash the same stuff that we've been through 20, 30 years before. So circumstances change, of course, and finding that balance between encouragement and then not wasting time is a tough one. And, you know, as I said, nothing more rewarding, nothing more frustrating.
Excellent. Well, thank you. Thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next week.